The pen was already in my hand when I noticed the date. I was sitting in a small office at Maple Ridge, the nursing home my son had just moved me into, and there was a medical form near the bottom of the stack. At the top it said I'd been evaluated by a doctor on March the 3rd. On March the 3rd I was home alone, in my bathrobe, watering the ferns. No doctor. No appointment. No one at all. I looked up at my son, at his good shoes and his calm, certain voice, and he didn't even glance at me. "Standard stuff, Mom," he said. "Sign at the little arrow." So I signed. But I wrote that date down in my head and kept it there, the way you hold on to a number you're afraid to lose. Because there was a question sitting in my chest, cold and quiet, and I couldn't make it go away. Who evaluated me on a day I spent completely alone? The pen was already in my hand when I noticed the date. I was sitting in a small office at Maple Ridge, a place with soft carpet and softer voices, and my son Daniel was beside me, tapping the table the way he used to tap his cereal spoon when he was a boy and wanted something. There was a stack of papers in front of me. Intake forms, he called them. Just signatures, Mom. Just so they can take care of you. I had buried my husband 11 weeks earlier. I was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. So when Daniel said the house was too much for me now, that I'd left the stove on twice, that he worried every single night, I believed him. A mother wants to believe her son worries about her. But there was a form near the bottom of the stack. A medical form. And at the top it said I had been evaluated on March the 3rd. On March the 3rd I had been home alone, in my bathrobe, watering the ferns and listening to the radio. No doctor. No appointment. No one at all. I looked at that date and something cold moved through me. "What's this one?" I asked. Daniel didn't even look up. "Standard stuff. Sign at the little arrow." I signed. I want you to understand that I signed, because that's the part one had to live with afterward. But I also wrote the date down in my head, the way you tuck away a phone number you don't want to forget. March the 3rd. That night, in a room that wasn't mine, I lay awake and asked myself a question I didn't want to ask. Who evaluated me on a day I was alone? Let me tell you who I was before all this, because it matters. My name is Eleanor. Ellie, to the people who love me. I taught 4th grade for 31 years in the same brick school where I'd once been a student myself. I raised 2 children in a yellow house on Linden Street with a porch that my husband, Ray, repainted every other spring. Maggie, my daughter, lives 3 states away with 2 kids and a job that never lets her breathe. And Daniel, my son, stayed close. He became a financial advisor. He wore good shoes and spoke in a calm, certain voice, and for years I was proud of how sure he always sounded. Ray and I saved carefully. We paid off the house. We were not rich, but we were safe. That word mattered to us. Safe. When Ray's heart gave out in the kitchen on an ordinary Tuesday, the safe world tipped sideways, and Daniel was the one who caught me. He handled the funeral home. He handled the bank. He handled the mail. He said, "Mom, you don't need to think about any of this," and I let him take it all, because thinking felt like swimming in wet cement. I see now that grief makes a person easy to lead. I didn't see it then. The first thing that felt wrong, before Maple Ridge, was the mail. I have always been the one who brings in the mail. It's a small ritual, the walk to the box, the flip through the envelopes. But after Ray died, the box was always empty by the time I got to it. Daniel had a key. He said he was sorting out the bills so the sad envelopes wouldn't pile up on me. One afternoon I came into the kitchen and found a torn envelope in the trash. It was from my bank. Just the corner of it, with the logo. I picked it out and held it, and I couldn't tell you why my hands were shaking. Why would my son throw away my bank mail before I ever saw it? I called the bank the next morning, while Daniel was at work. I didn't tell him. That was the first secret I kept, and it felt strange and a little shameful, keeping a secret from my own son in my own kitchen. But the cold feeling from March the 3rd hadn't left me. The woman at the bank was kind. I asked her to read me my recent statements. And she did, in a flat, pleasant voice, line by line, and the lines stopped making sense. There was a home equity line of credit on my house. I knew about it. Ray and I had opened it years ago and never touched it. It had a zero balance for as long as I could remember. It did not have a zero balance now. $60,000 had been drawn from it. In 3 withdrawals. Over 3 months. The most recent one, 11 days before, was labeled with a short note in the system. The woman read it to me slowly. It says, Ridge deposit, she told me. Maple Ridge. The money was supposedly a deposit for the very place my son had just moved me into. But here is the thing I learned later, the thing that made my stomach drop. Maple Ridge had never received a deposit. Not $1. I know because I eventually asked them directly. So where had $60,000 of my home gone? I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I hung up. The ferns needed water. I didn't water them. I did something instead. I decided to stop being told the story, and start finding it. The next time I visited the house, because by then I was living at Maple Ridge, you understand, sleeping in a stranger's idea of comfort, I went looking for the intake packet. Daniel kept a copy in a folder in the kitchen drawer, the one where Ray used to keep the spare keys. I didn't take it. I was afraid to take it. Instead, I laid each page on the counter and photographed it with the phone Maggie had taught me to use, my hands not quite steady, listening the whole time for the sound of Daniel's car. That's how I found the power of attorney. I remembered signing something Daniel had called just a precaution, in case you're ever in the hospital. But the document on my counter was not a precaution. It was a full, durable power of attorney, the kind that hands another person the keys to your entire life. My signature was on it. It was mine, I could see that it was mine. But the witness line carried a name I had never heard. A stranger had supposedly watched me sign a document I didn't understand. And clipped behind it was the medical form. The one from March the 3rd. A letter, really, on clean letterhead, stating that I, Eleanor, had been examined and found to be of diminished capacity, unable to manage my own financial affairs. It was signed by a doctor whose name I did not recognize, from a clinic I had never visited. My son had a letter that said I had lost my mind. And he'd had it written on a day I spent alone with my ferns. I called my daughter that night, and for the first time since the funeral, I cried. Maggie is the practical one. She got quiet, the way she does when she's frightened and doesn't want you to know. Then she said, Mom, send me everything. Every photo. Tonight. We stayed on the phone past midnight. She pulled up the bank's online records from her kitchen in another state while I read her dates and numbers off my photographs. And together, slowly, we built a shape out of the pieces. The $60,000 had not gone to Maple Ridge. It had gone, in 3 neat transfers, to an account she could only see the last digits of. Those digits matched an account Daniel had once asked me to deposit a birthday check into, years ago. I remembered because the number ended the same way as his birthday. He's moving your money, Maggie said. And the letter, Mom, the letter is so he can do it without anyone stopping him. If you're incapacitated, nobody questions the son who's helping his poor mother. I didn't want it to be true. I want to be honest about that. Part of me went looking for a reason it wasn't true, some innocent explanation, some misunderstanding I could forgive over coffee. A mother's heart will argue against her own eyes for a long, long time. But the numbers didn't argue. The numbers just sat there, patient and terrible. Then Daniel pushed too hard, and pushing was his mistake. He came to Maple Ridge on a Sunday with another form. A consolidation, he called it, smiling, sliding it across the little table in the visitors' lounge. Just one more signature, Mom, and everything's tidy. I had learned something by then. I said I'd like to read it overnight first. The smile went out of his face like a light switched off. I had never seen that look on my son before, not the boy with the cereal spoon, not the man in the good shoes. For just a second, somebody else was sitting across from me. You don't need to read it, he said. You know you get confused with this stuff. I'd like to read it anyway, I said. My voice was calmer than I felt. He leaned back. And then he said the thing I will never forget, in a gentle, reasonable tone, as if he were doing me a kindness. You should be careful, Mom. If you start fighting the people trying to help you, this place might decide they can't keep you. And then what? You can't go back to the house alone. Not in your condition. In my condition. He said it so smoothly. A threat wearing the coat of concern. And in that moment the last of my doubt burned off like fog in the sun. My son was not confused about my mind. My son was counting on a letter that said I'd lost it. I didn't sign the consolidation form. I took it to my room and read every line, and when I didn't understand a line, I circled it. The next morning, a woman named Carla knocked on my door. She was the intake coordinator at Maple Ridge, the one with the clipboard and the tired kind eyes. She closed the door behind her, which I'd learned meant she was about to do something the rules didn't strictly require. Mrs. Brandt, she said. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did your doctor really evaluate you before you came here? I told her the truth. I told her about March the 3rd and the ferns and the radio. Carla sat down slowly. Then she pulled a copy of the incapacity letter from her folder and laid it on the bed between us, and she pointed to the letterhead at the top. This clinic, she said quietly. I used to refer patients there. It closed 2 years ago. The doors are boarded up. I drive past it on my way home. We looked at each other. A letter, dated this March, on the letterhead of a clinic that had been closed for 2 years. Signed by a doctor whose name, Carla told me she'd already checked, did not appear anywhere in the state's registry of licensed physicians. The doctor didn't exist. The clinic didn't exist. Only the lie existed, and the lie had my name on it. I shouldn't be showing you this, Carla said. But I have a mother too. Carla gave me a name. An elder law attorney named Mr. Okafor, who had once helped a resident's family with something similar. I called his office from the pay phone in the lounge, because I no longer trusted the phone Daniel could check. Mr. Okafor was an older man with steady hands and a way of listening that made me feel, for the first time in months, like a competent adult and not a problem to be managed. I spread my photographs across his desk. The power of attorney. The forged letter. The bank statements Maggie had printed. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. Then he took off his glasses. Mrs. Brandt, he said. I'm going to tell you plainly, because you've earned plain talk. This power of attorney, the way it's written, gives the holder almost unlimited control over your money and your housing. On its own, that's legal, if you signed it knowingly. But this, he touched the letter, this is something else. A document claiming a medical evaluation that never happened, on the letterhead of a defunct clinic, signed by a physician who isn't licensed. That isn't a gray area. That's forgery. And using it to move your money is financial exploitation of an elder. Those are crimes. I had known it in my stomach for weeks. Hearing a careful man say it out loud in a quiet office was different. It made it real in a way I couldn't take back. He folded his hands. So I have to ask you the hard question, and only you can answer it. The person who did this, are you prepared to hold them accountable? Even if it's someone you love? I didn't answer him that day. I couldn't. I drove back to Maple Ridge and sat in the parking lot until the streetlights came on. Because the person I had to hold accountable had once been a small boy who fell asleep on my shoulder in this very car. Mr. Okafor did one more thing before I left. He pulled the records he could legally request, and a few days later he called me with the rest of it. The reason. The why. Daniel's business had collapsed. Quietly, the way these things do, behind the good shoes and the certain voice. He had made bad bets with other people's money and then with his own, and he was buried in debt so deep that the house he lived in was no longer really his. He had needed money fast, and the only untouched money in the family was sitting in the walls of my paid-off house on Linden Street. So he had drawn down my home equity to cover his losses. And to keep anyone, the bank, his sister, me, from asking questions about why his mother's accounts were draining, he had needed me to be officially, on paper, unable to manage my own affairs. The nursing home wasn't about my safety. It was about my silence. A confused old woman in a care facility doesn't call the bank. Doesn't read her mail. Doesn't ask what Emridge deposit means. And then Mr. Okafor told me the last thing, and it was the thing that finally broke something loose in me. There had been a change made to Ray's life insurance policy. A beneficiary change, filed after Ray died, moving a portion of the payout away from me. Filed by someone using that same power of attorney. He had reached past his own father's death to take from me. That was the moment my grief turned into something with a spine. I chose to confront him myself first. Mr. Okafor advised against it. He wanted everything to go through proper channels. But I needed to look at my son's face. I needed to give him one chance to be the man I'd raised, even though I already knew what I would see. I asked Daniel to come to Maple Ridge on a Saturday. I had a folder of my own now. Copies. Mr. Okafor had the originals. When Daniel sat down with his easy smile, I slid the folder across the table the way he had slid his forms across to me. He opened it. I watched the smile work hard to stay in place. "Mom, what is this?" "You tell me," I said. "Tell me about the clinic that closed 2 years ago. Tell me about the doctor who doesn't exist. Tell me where $60,000 went, since it never came here." For a moment he tried the old voice, the calm certain one. He said I was confused. He said someone had gotten into my head, that Maggie was turning me against him, that I didn't understand how complicated finances were. I let him talk. I had taught 4th grade for 31 years. I know the sound of a child who's been caught and is still hoping the story will hold. Then I said, very quietly, "I've already spoken to a lawyer, Daniel." The voice stopped. The shoes stopped tapping. And my son put his face in his hands, and the whole thing came apart. He admitted the debt. He admitted the letter, he'd paid someone for it, he wouldn't say who. He admitted the transfers. And then he did the thing I had been most afraid of, he begged. He said it would ruin him, that he'd go to prison, that I would be killing my own son, and couldn't we just keep this in the family, couldn't I just sign the consolidation and let him fix it quietly? "You wrote a letter saying I'd lost my mind," I said. "And then you asked me to trust you with everything." He didn't have an answer for that. There isn't one. I didn't decide everything in that room. That's not how real life works. I went home, to Maple Ridge that night, and then, soon after, to Linden Street. Because the first thing Mr. Okafor did was revoke the power of attorney. One signature, mine, freely given in a lawyer's office with a real witness, and the keys to my life came back to me. We froze the accounts. We reported the forged letter to the authorities and to the state board, because a person who forges a physician's signature will do it to some other frightened widow if no one stops him. The bank had a fraud unit. I had never known such a thing existed. They walked through the transfers with me, and because the incapacity letter was a forgery, because I had never knowingly authorized the equity draws, most of the $60,000 was recovered over the following months. It was slow. There were forms. But the house was mine, free and clear, the way Ray and I had made it. The hardest part was not the money. The hardest part was the choice Mr. Okafor had named in his office. In the end, I did not send my son to prison. I want to tell you it was because of some great wisdom, but the truth is simpler and less noble. He was still my boy. So we made an agreement, in writing, with lawyers in the room, full restitution on a schedule, supervised, with consequences spelled out in plain language if he missed a single step. Counseling. And no access, none, ever again, to my accounts, my mail, or my home without me present. He signed it. His hand shook the way mine had shaken at that intake table. I noticed that, and I did not enjoy it the way I once might have imagined I would. Justice, it turns out, is not a trophy. It's just a fact you put in a drawer. I live on Linden Street again. The ferns survived, which feels like more of a miracle than it should. Maggie calls every Sunday now, and sometimes she puts the grandchildren on, and their voices fill the kitchen where Ray fell and where I once sat shaking over a torn envelope. Carla and I send each other cards. Mr. Okafor sends a note every birthday, and I send one back. Daniel and I speak. Not often, and not the way we used to. The restitution payments come on time. We are something now that doesn't have a clean name, not estranged, not close. A mother and a son standing on opposite sides of a thing that can't be unsaid. I don't know if I've forgiven him. I've stopped believing that forgiveness is the only door out of pain. Peace is a different door, and I walked through that one on my own. There's a folder in my bedroom drawer. Inside it is one copy of the letter that said I had lost my mind. People ask me why I would hold on to something so ugly. I keep it because on March the 3rd, when everyone told me I was confused, I noticed a date that didn't belong. I trusted my own eyes when it would have been so much easier to trust the people telling me not to. I'm 68 years old. My memory is fine. My mind is my own. And the next time someone tells me, in a soft voice, that it's all for my safety, I'll read every line before I sign.